Welcome to the Food for Thought podcast, giving you the tools and resources you need to live according to your own values of compassion and wellness, joyfully, healthfully, deliciously, and sustainably. Today's episode is Pet Trusts and Bequests, Planning for the Care of Our Animals. Before we get to that topic, my name is Patrick-Goudreau. You can find me at joyfulvegan.com and on social media. You can find my books wherever books are sold, and you can join me in my online cooking classes. This podcast is possible because of the support of listeners like you. Yes, you. So thank you very much for subscribing to the podcast, for supporting it, and for listening. You can join other supporters by going to patreon.com/ColleenPatrick-Goudreau to become a patron. Hi, everyone. I hope you are doing fabulously well. I think it goes without saying that this has been an incredible 2 years during this pandemic, filled with twists and turns and disappointments and loss and the need to be flexible and resilient. And hopefully what has come out of it, one of the silver linings, hopefully, is an awareness about the fragility of life and the inevitability of death. Now, I don't think we needed a pandemic to teach us that, because life has always been fragile and death has always been looming. And many of us already live our lives in such a way that we express gratitude, feel gratitude for the life we have. But I think any great catastrophe that happens, where we're all affected, and we all have been affected. It's a pandemic. Pan means all. It literally means everyone. We have all been affected by this. It certainly drives it home. And this idea of death looming and us being grateful for the life we have right now, here and now, is a topic that philosophers and artists and musicians for thousands of years have been reminding us of, that we will die, not to depress us, but to inspire us to live the most fulfilling lives possible, to feel the most alive while we're here. And one way to appreciate life more is to remember that we will die. Memento Mori, right? That so goes the Latin phrase. It's a concept that the Stoics live by, is remembering that we will die. And this fact is with me every minute of every day. I've always been someone who is aware that everything I have can be taken away in the snap of a finger. And I've always aspired to be aware that the rug could be pulled out from under you. From early experiences I had, that's what was instilled in me. And it's actually made my life richer, because I don't take this day for granted. And I don't take for granted the fact that things could go awry that are out of my control. So I do what I can to control, or at least to make a plan for what is out of my control, and to at least have a plan in place for emergencies. So when I say plans in place, in this case, for the topic we're talking about today, I'm talking specifically about what's called estate planning, having a will, living will, trust, durable power of attorney, healthcare directive, all of the things that are part of an estate plan, as it were. And not only that, but also having plans in place for my animals should some emergency take place, in the event of the death of both my husband and I at the same time. So I have all of this taken care of. We have the trust and the will and the power of attorney. All of that is decided. It's sealed and accessible to the necessary people, right? And that includes all of the plans for what I need to make sure I have in place for my cats, should something happen to us. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Specifically, a few small things we can do to make sure the animals we love and care for while we're alive are cared for and loved should we die before them and unexpectedly. And I know a lot of people are reluctant to talk about the plans we need to make for when we die. People think they're not going to be here, and so why even worry about it, right? What does it matter? Or people just avoid it because they don't want to face the inevitable, which is that we are all going to die. Memento Mori. So I would just say that when it comes to the assets you have, your house, your condo, or a townhouse, or a car, or a bank account, anything at all, valuables, a piece of jewelry, an heirloom, all of it matters because we should want to allocate these things to people we love when we die, or to organizations we want to give our assets to. It also makes it so much easier for our survivors to know exactly what our wishes are and how we want our assets to be dissolved and divided. And I will be honest, the number of friends I talk to who don't have a will or a trust or a living will or a health directive, it astonished me, the number of friends who don't have this. And it's almost everyone I talk to. And again, I know some people think, well, I don't have a lot. I'm not Rockefeller. It's called estate planning, which always sounds so grand. But you don't have to be Rockefeller to want to allocate the things you've worked hard for to the people you care about once you're no longer here, right? I mean, you wouldn't want complete strangers deciding how your money is spent now while you're alive. Why would you want complete strangers deciding how your money, how your property, how it's allocated after you're dead? Even if it's not millions of dollars, it doesn't have to be. You don't have to be Rockefeller to value the money you've earned and the things you have that are valuable, right? They are valuable and they'll be valuable to someone else. And more than that, as I said, it is such a gift to give to your surviving family members, whether they're children or grandchildren or siblings or spouses or parents, whomever is tasked with managing your estate, sometimes by just default, right? If you don't have these things in place, it will be the person who by default will think, well, I got to step up and do this. It is so difficult to deal with this, right? Knowing what to do with what you possessed when you were alive. Most people don't know what everybody else wants, right? Most people haven't talked about this. And if you haven't talked about this, they don't know what you want. And it's already so difficult to deal with the death of a loved one, dealing with the trauma, dealing with the loss, dealing with the grief, and then having to deal with your assets and your property and everything you worked so hard for and your animals. And that's what we're going to talk about today. It's the last thing we would want is to just, I don't know, throw caution to the wind and just think, okay, someone else can take care of it. We're not going to be here. It doesn't matter. It does matter. And anyone who has dealt with a loss and has had to deal with the death of a parent or, as I said, a spouse or any of it, it's so difficult. And it's such a gift to know exactly what to do. It's such a gift. So that's what I want to talk about today, having these plans in place in writing for the inevitable, for our eventual death. And I cannot impress upon you enough how important it is to have a will and a trust and a living will. And as I said, a health directive, durable power of attorney, details in writing about what you want your body, what happened to your body when you die. Now, I am going to do an episode specifically about those things, especially things that are related to my work, right? Specifically sustainability and veganism, etc. For instance, I'm going to talk about sustainable burials and how to include in your health directive that you don't want to be fed animal products if you're incapacitated. That's something you can include, about bequesting money to animal organizations in your will. So we'll talk about those kinds of things. What I want to talk about today is the importance of having things in place for your furry, finned, feathered animals in the event that we die before they do. And if you're listening to this episode, if you're listening to Food for Thought, my guess is that you consider your dogs or cats or bunnies or birds or iguanas to be part of your family. And you want to make sure they're taken care of after you're gone. And if that's the case, if you really want to make sure that happens, you need to make a plan. Because in the eyes of the law, animals, pets, I'm going to use the legal vernacular here. Obviously, I consider my animals not my playthings, as the word pet implies, but they are my companions. They are my furry babies. But I'm going to use pets sometimes interchangeably because it is the legal vernacular. And the things that we're going to be talking about are things like pet trusts, and that's what they're called. They're not called animal companion trusts. So for just ease of speech, I'll sometimes use the word pet, but literally in terms of the legal vernacular, pets are considered property. And you can't use your will to leave them an inheritance. For instance, I can't write a will and leave Charlie and Michko, my current cats, my house after I die so that the sale of the house will pay for their care. That's not how it works. They're considered property under the law. So it's like saying I want to leave my house to my car. Like, it doesn't make any sense, and it will have no standing in court once I die. And if I don't have it properly set up, and if I don't have any plan in place, my cats will, the way it works is your property is seized by probate court, and we'll talk a little bit about this, kind of the worst case scenario, but they could be sent to a shelter unless I have plans in place for them. So number one, you cannot leave your property to your animals because your animals are considered property under the law. But there are a lot of things we can do to make sure they're going to be taken care of and to make sure that there is money for their care, right? So we have plans in place for our animals. And because of the experience I've had thinking this through, I hope by the end of this episode, you will see the importance of doing the same. So let's talk about how to go about this. While you can't leave your property to them, you can have a guardian or guardians for them, for their care, for the remainder of their lives. And you can leave money and property to that person or to those people. And you can even set up a pet trust, and along with the pet trust, a trustee to oversee the distribution of the funds you allocate for the care of your animals for the remainder of their lives, right? So let's talk about the basics you need to make sure that your furry babies or your finned babies or your feathered babies are well cared for and traumatized as little as possible when you die, if you die before them. Number one, decide who will care for them. Talk to friends, talk to family members, obviously choosing people who already love animals and possibly who already know your animals and love your animals. That's going to be the best course. Now, we have some very good friends who have agreed to take care of Charlie and Michko should we die before them. And that might be enough for you to just start there, because I know that's a lot to even have that conversation with family members or friends. And it's a lot to kind of decide, figure out, or have them agree to take care of your animals. Now, in my case, we're talking 2 cats. In your case, you might have 5 dogs, you might have horses, you might have 5 cats. I mean, that's going to be something to consider as well. And of course, when I talk about this, I'm talking about the scenario if both my husband and I died at the same time. And for those who are listening for the first time and don't know my background, we don't have children. So it wouldn't be just obvious that my kids would take care of our animals, right? So in the event that, I died or David died and left the other widowed, of course, the other would care for our cats. But honestly, and that's the case for David and I, period, full stop. But honestly, I've worked in animal rescue long enough to know that even that can go awry. I've seen so many animals surrender to shelters because the surviving spouse considered the dog or cat, let's just say dog or cat here, that would be the most obvious scenario, but any companion animal, to be the dog or cat or companion animal of their deceased spouse, not really theirs. So they surrender them because they don't want to take care of them. It happens a lot more than you think. So perhaps I'm stating the obvious here, but talk to your spouse or partner and confirm that they will take care of your beloved animal should something happen to you. Don't assume. Talk to them. And then and if that's squared away and they're like, yep, got it, I'm on it, of course, then talk to close family members or siblings or friends who you think might step up and care for your babies. As I said, we have very good friends, Amanda and Devin. If you're listening, thank you so much, who have agreed to take care of Charlie and Michko should we die together. And every time we travel, I check in with them to make sure we're still good. Like, we're leaving on a plane. Like, are we good? Like, are you still? And I just make sure that we're all on the same page, which is a really good idea to do, because you may have had this conversation 5 years ago, but haven't had that conversation with this person, who you talked to 5 years before again. So it's a good idea to check in every so often. At this recording, Charlie and Michiko are going on 12 and 11, which I can't believe. And I'm really grateful that we have this plan in place with our friends, and we've had it for years. And I'm also very grateful I've never had to implement it. I'm really glad my friends don't have to take care of Charlie and Michiko. I don't want them to take care of Charlie and Michiko, because it means we're not here anymore, or we're incapacitated and can't take care of them. So best case scenario is they'll never have to do it, right? But it's also not a bad idea to have a plan B, just in case Amanda and Devin, maybe something's going on in their lives at the time and they aren't able to do it. It's a good idea to have a plan B, just another person or a couple people in place, just in case that solution doesn't work out. It's also a good idea to let your other friends and family members know what the plan is, right? So let's say, I don't know, our cat sitter finds out first that we died, if we're away and something happened, or our neighbors find out first. I mean, they're not going to necessarily know that Amanda and Devin are there to take care of our cats, or if some friends find out that we died, but they don't know Amanda and Devin. I mean, it just avoids confusion and stress to just let different friends and family members know who has agreed to take care of your animals. That way, that can all be settled, right? And so the rest of the grieving and the rest of all of the logistics can take place, knowing that, okay, let's just make sure Charlie and Michiko are in good hands. Let's make sure they're in the right hands, and we can move forward, right? Now, it's also a good idea to continue having this conversation if you continue to adopt more animals, right? So just communication, checking in, being discerning, being open, and spreading the word among your close friends and family. So that's number one, deciding who can and will take care of your animals, checking in with them every so often, telling other friends and family what the plan is, and continuing to have the conversation with your friends or family members if you adopt new animals, and then having a second plan in place just in case. Now, if you have several animals, I mentioned you may have more than 2, more than 3. Consider if you want one person to care for all of them, or if you want to separate them. I mean, there are people who say, our cats don't really get along, so they're okay being set if they went to separate homes. Or let's say you have friends who would take your dogs, but not your cats, and vice versa. So you want to have that conversation as well, and you want to have that decided as well. And as you create a more formal plan, you're going to want to make sure that's indicated. And obviously you would do that as you're especially guided through this process by the questions you would be asked by an attorney who is setting up the trust for you, or even prompted if you're doing it yourself through some kind of software program. Now, if there's no one in your life you trust to look after your animals, you can still put things in place in terms of a local rescue group. They could be the beneficiary. Obviously, you would want to check with this organization first. I think you would want to leave a donation to them. I think they would probably maybe expect that, but to offset the costs of caring for the animals, leave a donation. If you adopted an animal from a rescue organization and you don't have any friends or family who would take your animals in the event of your death, then reach out to that organization and find out what the adoption agreement said. Will they be able to be returned to that organization, who will then find another home for your animals if the animals go back to them? It's heartbreaking for me to even think about that, because it's so painful to think about that, but it happens all the time. It happens all the time. And I think we need to remember that the reason we can even do that is because there are good people running rescue organizations and city, municipal, and county shelters. There are good people. So, worst case scenario is still, at least there are people who will be there in the event that your animals need to be rehomed. It's a sad thing to think about, but at least those rescue organizations are there. It was a very different case, a few hundred years ago. That's not how things were done. And so in the event that something should happen and you don't have a plan, but also you don't have anybody, you can make your plan talking to rescue organizations in your area and having a plan in place through them. Now, if you ever travel at all, if you ever use sitters, dog sitters, cat sitters, pet sitters, what have you, you probably already have instructions written out, right? What type of food they like, how they like to play, what allergies they have, their favorite toys, their vet records, their vet information, pet insurance you might have, documents about your animal's health, anything that your sitters need, you probably have that in place. Now, we have that in place. I have a Google Doc, which is really helpful to have these things, by the way, in the cloud or in Google, because you're able to then access it. And a number of people can access these documents at any given time, and you can update them all the time, right? You don't have to keep sending individual documents via email. You always have the most updated version in Google, or whatever similar program. I assume there's similar programs out there, but I use Google, and we have a whole Google folder, which includes our trust and our will, right? That is a folder that has all of those documents. But in that folder, among those documents, I also have the instructions for our cats. Now, I have these instructions for our cats, for our sitters, and I update it, as I said, all the time. But I also share that with Amanda and Devin so that they have the information should they wind up becoming guardians of Charlie and Michiko, and they know what all of their likes and dislikes are, right? So they have that information too. And the person, David's sister, is our executor and the trustee for our trust. She has access to that whole folder, and she'd also be able to see that. Now, on that document, I also have Amanda and Devin's phone number, so that our cat sitter, who, the person who's staying with our cats, and I'm always using the travel as an example because that's probably the most likely scenario where David and I would die together at the same time. So our cat sitter, we're traveling, our cat sitter, something happens to us. They already have that document that has, here's how you feed them. Here's what they eat. Here's how much they eat. And on that document, obviously it has friends and family members' contact information, including, hey, here's Amanda and Devin's phone number. They're the ones who said they would take the cats if something should happen to us, right? So it just avoids confusion. Things could go smoothly. It's not going to be perfect. Death is messy, but at least it curtails any confusion about what to do should you die, right? So if you can't already tell, I'm a planner. It's very satisfying to have these things in place, because even though it's not perfect and, things could still go awry, at least I'm trying to make it as easy as possible for everyone should something happen to us. This part should just go smoothly, and then the rest, is just really hard. And I've joked in the past, actually, that, we do have this document. It's like 10 pages long, right? And I've joked that, I give 10 pages. Now, obviously, a couple of those pages are these phone numbers that I'm talking about. But I do have all the details about how Charlie likes to play and which toys Michiko loves, and don't pet Charlie here, and their likes and dislikes and their personalities and their preferences, etc. But this is really helpful to give to the people who will be caring for your animals should you die. So if you don't already have this set up for sitters, maybe you never travel, maybe you never have a sitter, and you've never written this book, write it out now and give it to, again, the friends who will take care of your animals, but other family members who you don't know, they might wind up taking care of your animals after all, right? So share this document with several friends and family members, so they all have it, right? So it's accessible to everybody. And then they know what to feed them. It's not guesswork. Life will go on. This is what happens in shelters and the organizations I've worked for in the past. You don't know what they were eating beforehand, and it's a little bit of trial and error, and you figure it out. But their bellies could get upset, or maybe they're allergic to a certain food. So having all of that in one place is going to be super, super helpful for everyone, and especially for your animals. Especially for your animals who are going to be traumatized enough if you're no longer here. So create that document for your sitters or just for the caregivers. It will be so helpful, and keep it updated. I recently updated mine. I update mine all the time because as we're going away, maybe 6 months have passed since the last time. Maybe I've moved their water bowl, whatever. So I keep it updated. But recently, a friend of mine had a very good friend who lives here in Oakland, and we were walking, and she was telling me about an emergency situation she had with her dog, who, because of COVID, they had some emergency situation. She called emergency vets because COVID has changed everything. And most of them had an 8-hour long wait. And some other vets just weren't taking new patients. And that's the case. And I hear from a lot of people regarding vets. Get a vet now. Like, if you don't have a vet that you can go to now because there's a 6-month waiting list for them, get on the waiting list and get that in place now. Because the last thing you want to have to worry about is having to scramble for a vet or an emergency vet clinic, in the middle of the night, right? So she told me this, and I went, I haven't updated the emergency vet information on my document in a very long time because I just had the emergency vet number there and thought, okay, that's good. But I'm really glad I checked, because when I went to go put in more than one emergency vet, because that's what we discussed, she said, I tried this place, that place, and this place ultimately had a 4-hour long wait. So I was like, okay, we'll go there, right? So I thought, well, let me have more than one emergency clinic on the document for my sitter. And they're obviously capable of figuring this out if there is an emergency. But again, I want to make it as easy as possible. If someone's having a seizure in the middle of the night, and she just knows to go right to a document where I have 3 listed and she can start there. So I went to the document and to update and add 2 more. But in the one that I had there, I had an old phone number. It wouldn't have even worked. So I'm sure it would have been okay. But now I have 3 nearby emergency vets listed on our information doc just to make it easier. So, okay, so once you've figured out who's going to care for your animals, and you've spread that word to everybody around, just so your friends and family know, and you have that secured, and you have the information about your animals and what someone's going to need to take care of them, as well as they can, as well as you do. The next thing is to put something in writing with the friends, but even more importantly is to allocate funds to cover the cost of the care for your animals. Now, if you already have an estate plan, if you already have a will and a trust and all of that, which I highly recommend you do, then this is just something you can add. You would reach out to the attorney who created your will and trust, and you would let them know that you'd like to make an amendment. If you haven't created your will and trust and your living will and your health directive, all of that, please reach out to an estate attorney or go get some estate planning software and do it ASAP. I have an estate attorney I would be very happy to recommend if you would like a referral. I have known him for almost 20 years. He's a friend. He's fantastic. He's local here in Oakland, but one of the silver linings of COVID is that all of this stuff can be done virtually wherever you live. So if you're interested, reach out to me. You can reach out to Colleen at joyfulvegan.com, and I'd be very happy to give you his information. So while you're setting up your trust, this is assuming you're doing it for the first time, you would just tell your state attorney that you want to allocate funds in your trust for whomever you've spoken to who agreed to take care of your animals, right? The other option is to set up what is called a pet trust. So I want to now explain the difference between the two, and you could decide for yourself how you want to go about it. So number 1, as you're setting up your will and trust, or if you're going and revising it, you decide how much of your assets you want allocated to the people who've agreed to take care of your animals. Let's just call them the caregivers, right? Or guardians. Now, I'm saying if you should die, but it's also if you become incapacitated. And that would be part of like what you already have in place in your will and trust, like incapacitation. Is that a word? Being incapacitated? Incapacity? No. Is also included in your will, as is death, right? So that would be included, and just make sure that that is. And when deciding how much to leave the caregivers for the care of your animals, you want to consider their life expectancy. You want to consider how old they are now relative to what their life expectancy is, their current expenses, the likelihood of them developing health issues, all of the things that would factor in to cost, that the caregivers would have to be responsible for. And, they might have existing health issues, right? And so, consider that. Whatever you allocate, it should be within the realm of possibility of what your animal or animals would need for their care for the rest of their lives. Now, we crunched some numbers based on the cats we currently have. As I said, they're going on 12 and 11, and it's going to be different for you. But we just kind of crunched some numbers, and we don't want this to be a burden to our friends, and so we overestimated like how much it would be to take care, like probably way more than we would ever spend in the next 10 years. But we just want to be on the safe side, and we want them to feel that they have what they need to take care of our animals, right? And when I'm saying money, leaving money, this is obviously coming out of your estate. So whatever money you have in your bank account, or the sale of your house, or, investments, or whatever it is, right? So that's the idea. Now, you don't have to leave money for the caregivers, but I think obviously anybody who's going to be taking care of your animals would appreciate it very much. I'm sure that's not the condition most people would have, but I just want to make it easy for them. And so we've set aside money in our will to go directly to them for this purpose. Now, in the event that David and I both die at the same time, at that point, the person who's our power of attorney would implement the wishes, the directives, right, laid out in the trust, in the will. I mean, there's the executor of the will, there's the trustee of the trust, there's the power of attorney, right? The bottom line is the people who we've entrusted to do that, they would allocate the funds to our friends, and they would have the cats and they would have the funds, right? Now, in this scenario, this first scenario, you're just trusting that the caregivers will follow through on the agreement you've made and use the money you've provided to make sure that your animals are well cared for. There's no way to know this is happening other than you hope and you trust that the person who has agreed to be your animal's guardians, will do the right thing and just, give the best care to your animals, right? That's why it's really important to choose the right person or people. The point is, you're basically leaving money in your will to these people, to these friends, to these family members, with the intention that it's for the care of your animals-ish. I mean, as I said, we overestimated because our cats are now considered seniors and there could be expensive vet bills coming. But we didn't want our friends to feel overburdened, and we wanted to give a gift to our friends out of appreciation for their agreeing to care for our cats. So even if the animals, let's say in this, our cats should die within a year of them caring for them, and of course there's lots of money left over that they don't need to allocate to the animals' care, they would just keep the money. It's essentially a gift you're giving them with the agreement that you've made, either verbally or you can have an agreement in writing. But you're basically gifting these friends or these family members money from your will and trusting that they will do what they said they're going to do, care for your animals, right? So you leave $100,000, for them, and the cats die, and they've really only used they've used $500 or $1,000 or $500. Basically the rest of the money is theirs to keep. Now they might feel like, oh, I'm going to want to donate this to an organization, or, you can have that conversation as well. But as I said, in this case, you're just allocating money to friends in the will, and the rest is you just trusting. The rest is just an agreement. The second option you have is what is called a pet trust. It's a formal trust. In this case, you set aside money for your animal's care, similar to the first scenario, with a legally binding obligation that it's used only for your animal's benefit. So the difference is that it's not just allocated in the will that that this much money goes to this person and this much money goes to this and this much money goes to this person for the care of your animals. I mean, if you can even say that's not legally binding, but a trust is. So the trust allocates, and it's a separate document. It's a separate legal document within the trust, within your trust. The pet trust doesn't get triggered until your trust gets triggered, and your trust gets triggered when you die, right? So this trust gets triggered when you die. So you've allocated money specifically from the estate for the caregivers, specifically for the care of your animals. And in this case, the difference between this one and the first one is that you designate a trust protector. Just like you have a trust protector for your regular trust, your main trust, right? You have a trust protector for your pet trust, which is some other person that oversees the trust, the pet trust, someone other than the people who will be the caregivers. So this option provides a legal mechanism to try and ensure that the animals are being properly cared for. Maybe sounds overkill for most situations, but I'm just giving you the option. And again, I want to just make it clear. You for your main trust, you'd have someone who's overseeing that trust. It could be the same person who's doing this, but you'd really want to make sure that they're okay with it too, because it does require some work. It does require some time on their part. So that person who is the trust protector, they're the ones who are supposed to monitor the care being provided by the caregiver, right? They make annual payments or whatever the agreement is. They are the ones who allocate the funds to the caregiver for the care of the animals on the condition that the caregiver is properly caring for the animals. And then any money left in the trust on the death of the last surviving animal gets distributed to, again, whatever the agreement is, your chosen charities, or you can leave the remaining funds to the caregivers even after they've died. That would all be specified in this trust. Now, the downside to this arrangement is that it's a little more complicated. As I said, you need to have a trust protector. It comes with a cost because it costs money to set up this trust separately and to have it managed. And as I said, like finding the person who is going to be the trust protector, that's how this one's a little more complicated. So, you'd not only be looking for the right people to care for your animals, you'd also want to find the right person who's going to be the protector of this trust to make sure your wishes are fulfilled, to make sure that your animals are being well cared for, and who then allocates the money accordingly. Now, there are organizations who play this role, whose mission it is to serve as the trustee, the trust protector for pet trusts. So that is an option. You don't have to necessarily find a family member to be, or a friend to be the trust protector for the pet trust. I can't recommend any specifically because I've never used them. But I do think it's worth checking out if you want to go this route and you don't know who to pick as your trust protector. So do a Google search or get referrals or ask around, ask your estate attorney. They might be able to recommend someone. Reach out to an animal organization. Large animal organizations might know of some of these. Maybe the Humane Society might know of some they could recommend. But there are firms and organizations that can provide this service. They'd probably even be able to set up the pet trust for you. Many will do that as well. And then they serve as the trust protector. So that's another option. Full disclosure, what we're doing right now is the first option. I think I probably implied that in the way I spoke about it. But this is another option, and I think it's a good one if you want to take that route. So this is what happens should you die before your animals die and you have a plan in place. You've got your will, you've got your trust, you've got your power of attorney, you've got all of that. You've got your agreements and arrangements and your instructions and all of that, right? Now, like I said, it's not perfect. Things change, maybe people change, but it's the best possible scenario because you've got this in place. You've made the agreements, you've got the directives, the animals are going to go to the person who agreed to take care of them. Money's been allocated for their care for the remainder of their lives. Pretty good. Nothing's perfect, but pretty darn good. But if you don't have this in place, I'll just offer a couple scenarios. If you have a will, so number one scenario, you don't have anything in place. You haven't spoken to anybody. You don't have anybody who's agreed to take care of your animals. You're just going to assume that your dear friends and family members will make sure that they're going to be in good hands. Fine, great, that's good. That might happen. That could happen. I have plenty of friends who actually wound up adopting animals after their very, very good friends died, and they were the ones who stepped up and took the animal. And they did it willingly, happily, and had those animals for the rest of their lives, and they became part of the family. That is a very possible scenario, but it doesn't happen all the time. So this one scenario, if you don't have a plan in place, is you have a will, but it doesn't mention your companion animals. It doesn't mention any beneficiaries who will get funds to take care of the animals, right? You don't have anything at all specific for people who said they would take care of your animals, right? from the most practical and legal perspective, technically, your animals may go to your beneficiary. Now, this also might be a scenario that you don't want to be the case, right? Perhaps your beneficiary is your sister, and maybe she's good enough to be the beneficiary for other things, but you don't want her to have your animals, even though maybe she's wanted them, but you don't want her to have them. Maybe she has kids and like they don't get along with kids, like whatever, right? So the point is that if you don't have any plans, the animals may, could, would, will go to your beneficiary, because this is the person you named to receive what's left of your property after all your other beneficiaries are paid out. Okay. Now, maybe that's fine with you, but just make sure you know that this is what could happen. If you haven't had a conversation with that person and they find out that they're also inheriting a parrot or a snake or 5 cats or 2 dogs, you just might want to keep that in mind, because this is one of the ways animals wind up in a shelter. That person might be perfectly wonderful and loved you to bits and pieces and loved your animals, but cannot take care of them now that you're gone. Maybe they're allergic. Maybe they live overseas. Maybe they moved recently. Maybe they're older. Maybe they have too many animals of their own and they can't or don't want to have more. And while they may care about you and your animals, they may not know who you would have wanted to care for the animals, and maybe they can't get in touch with them. Or the first person they thought of didn't really want the animals either, and like now they don't have a plan, and time's running out and they have to move, or right? These are just life situations. It's very possible that your animals could in that case wind up in a shelter and possibly separated. Maybe you didn't want that to happen, right? So all of that is possible. It's probably not going to happen in your case, but it could happen. And it's heartbreaking for me to think about that. Now I'm thinking of, for instance, like the executor of our will is David's sister, right? She lives in New Jersey. She doesn't know any of my friends, and she's not going to take care of my cats, not because she's not a good person, but because she's never had cats. She doesn't want them. I don't think she's even met these cats, right? So if she doesn't know who to get a hold of, and if she doesn't know what our plan is and what we really wanted, this is how it happens. This is how animals wind up in shelters. And that's what breaks my heart. And that's if you have a will, but you didn't designate a caregiver for your animals or create a pet trust. Now, I can't control any of this once I'm dead. I can't control any of this once I'm incapacitated, but I can control it now. And that's what I just want to make sure I'm doing. So that's if you have a will. If you don't have a will when you die, if you have nothing at all, your property, animal companions included, because remember the law considers them property, are subject to your state's, it's called intestacy laws. This means that a local probate court appoints someone as the executor of your estate. So you have a complete stranger who becomes the executor of your estate. And they're responsible for deciding what happens to your animals. And this is a scenario where animals are most often just brought to shelters rather than given to family members or friends, unless family members and friends step up. But this is a scenario where animals wind up in shelters. So again, shelters, rescue groups, I'm so grateful they're there. And I am part of supporting the rescue groups and the shelter, the city shelter here in Oakland, supporting them in ways that I can, supporting them politically, supporting them financially, right? There are a lot of city shelters that also have a fundraising arm, usually a separate entity that's a nonprofit that raises funds for the shelter. So I know that when we think about the worst case scenario, it's that they're going to wind up in a shelter. I want to just turn that on its head just a little bit, enough to say, thank goodness they're there. Thank goodness they're there, because there was a time when animals were just left to fend for themselves, starved, on the street, or got injured, and they just became homeless. So I'm very grateful to the shelters and to the rescue groups who really do the hard work. But I want to make sure that my animals stay out of a shelter. So that's why I want to make sure that I have these things in place. So that's it. As I said, I am stunned by the number of people I talk to who don't have anything in place for their own assets or for their animals in the event of their death, which is what inspired me to do this episode. So I hope you see the importance of having something in place for yourself, for your animals. As I said, I'm very happy to recommend an estate attorney. You can reach out to me at colleen@joyfulvegan.com. You can also just go to Nolo's Quicken Willmaker and Trust. That's an option as well. You can do that on your own. It costs less, but I like working with an estate attorney. It's really helpful to be able to ask the questions. These are really hard questions that he's asking and that I'm asking. I mean, it's complicated. I actually enjoyed it very much. I enjoyed the process very much because I really like planning if it's not obvious. So I actually enjoyed, making the decision about who I'm leaving my money to. And, I say mine, obviously David, and our money, our assets, what organizations. We don't have children. So while we left some money to family members, mostly nieces and nephews, the majority of our assets are going to organizations we care about. And so I found it very satisfying to do this. And the other benefit of working with an attorney is that you can also amend these things very easily and get through some complicated things. So I've amended ours a couple times already, just in terms of organizations. We changed our mind on a couple organizations, and for something like this, you would be able to amend it pretty easily. So I hope that inspires you. You're very welcome to ask me any questions you have. I hope you inspire others around you to do the same thing, and reach out to me if you would like my estate attorney and referral. As always, you can find me at joyfulvegan.com. I hope to see you in one of my online cooking classes. You could just go to joyfulvegan.com to register. And I hope to see you on one of our trips. We have our Tuscany trip coming up in June 2022, and we have some spots left. And we have Rwanda in November. I just saw Ellen announced the completion of the Ellen Degeneres Center in Rwanda. It's not in Kigali. It's actually in a different town that's closest to the Volcanoes National Park. And we were there. We've gone to that. We've gone to the Diane Fossey Gorilla Fund headquarters every time we've gone to Rwanda. And the last time we were there, we got, kind of a virtual tour of the Ellen DeGeneres Center. This was a gift that Portia, her wife, gave to Ellen because of her love of Diane Fossey's work and her love of the gorillas in Rwanda. And so there's this new center, and it's going to be an educational center. And it's wonderful because it's going to really impact the lives of the folks who live in Rwanda, as well as visitors like us. So we will be going to that center, and I cannot speak more highly about Rwanda. I've done it so many times. Even when I look through the photos of where we're staying in some pretty fabulous places. Trust me, you're never going to stay in places this amazing, honestly. And I just cannot get over the beauty of this country. It is just such an incredible country. So I cannot wait to go back, and that's in November, and we've got space left. So everything else is sold out. Spots are filling up for these trips. So join me, go to joyfulvegantrips.com. And thank you for supporting this podcast. You can do so at patreon.com. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for listening. Thank you for leaving ratings and reviews. I would appreciate it very much if you could do that over at Apple Podcasts. And thank you for the animals. This is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thank you for listening.